So I actually have a bit of an interesting history on the question of convention of states. When I first ran for Senate in 2012, I was out campaigning and I was asked back in 2011, what do you think of a convention of states? And at the time, I vocally and vigorously advocated. I said, this is a great idea. We ought to do this. Washington doesn't listen to us. We ought to use this constitutional mechanism to force a convention of the states. And it was an interesting issue. It's one of the very few issues in my whole time in public life in which I have significantly changed my position on an issue. And what happened is I was campaigning across Texas, and I'd go stand in front of grassroots groups. I'd stand in front of Republican women's groups. I'd stand in front of Tea Party groups. More and more individual citizens raised very significant concerns, in particular Eagle Forum, which is a national organization mostly of conservative women across the country. Phyllis Schlafly founded Eagle Forum. They had very serious concerns that a convention of the states would become a runaway convention. A runaway convention is that you convene a convention for the purpose of, say, proposing a term limits amendment, and suddenly instead it proposes amendments to take away our religious liberty, take away our free speech rights, take away our Second Amendment rights, to radically rewrite the Constitution to put left-wing ideas into it. And it struck me how many grassroots activists were genuinely and deeply and seriously concerned about that prospect and that risk. And so back in 2011, 2012, when I was running for Senate, after listening to literally hundreds of activists disagree strenuously with me on the wisdom of a convention of states, I made the decision. I said, all right, I'm going to listen to the grassroots. And I hear the people of Texas telling me they're concerned about this step. They don't want to go down this step. They don't want to take the risk that it goes in an unpredicted direction. And so I'm going to listen to them and no longer advocate for them. And so I changed my views, and I did so transparently. I said I advocated for this. Activists spoke out vigorously against it. And I was persuaded I'm going to listen to the activists and not press for it anymore. Now, what's interesting, that was a decade ago. The world has changed a lot in a decade. In a decade, our national debt has grown by tens of trillions of dollars. In a decade, the abuse of Washington has gotten worse. In a decade, the swamp has gotten swampier. The career politicians in both parties are listening to the American people even less. And in my view, I think the momentum behind a convention of states is growing and growing and growing. Today, at the grassroots level, I see much, much more momentum for a convention of states than there was a decade ago. When I was advocating it for a decade ago, there was not a huge push behind it. Now it is growing more and more and more. And I got to say, the opposition, as I see it, has diminished dramatically. That the conservatives who were raising concerns about it, I think they're so frustrated with Washington that their attitude is, it's hard to see things getting any worse. So my view is either Congress will listen, and historically what's happened, there have been previous moves to have a convention of the states. Historically, what has happened is when you get close to a convention of the states, Congress typically has gotten nervous and said, oh, crap, we don't know what will happen in that convention, so why don't we propose the amendment they're agitating for, because that way we'll take the steam away from that movement. I think it's entirely possible that as the Convention of States movement gains more and more momentum, that finally Congress will listen and propose amendments like a term limit amendment or a balanced budget amendment. But if they don't, I think a convention of states is getting much more likely.